Hello everybody, today I have another chess video to show off. This is a game played between me and another person in the 1200 rating. I've been kind of hesitant on putting up chess videos lately because my rating isn't so high. So I don't really get to play against really good people, and they always make mistakes. It takes a while to get your rating up. For my Halo Wars viewers, it's sort of like getting a true skill higher when you already have a bunch of games played. Anyway, enough about that. Let's get into this game. So the game starts off with pawn to c4, and I'm playing black pieces, by the way. And this is the English opening. Now, I've seen this before, and I haven't really had a lot of experience playing with it, and I decided to just kind of play it safe and not aggressive. Normally, when I know an opening pretty well, if anyone knows opening pretty well, you should really play aggressive. So I decided to play a little passive here because I simply just haven't played against it a lot, and I really don't know most of the main lines or main variations of how it's played. So I decided to play pawn to e6, hoping I can get it into the French defense. He responds to knight to c3, and then I respond with pawn to d5, and this is exactly almost like the French defense. The idea right here basically in this main game here is to try and attack the center. The whole point is, and at least in the beginning of the game, is to get control of the center, so you'll have a better position and you'll win. Now he decides to bring his pawn up to stop my pawn from pushing up to attack his knight. I decide to break apart the center even more. Now when he captures, I capture back with my bishop. The next thing I kind of want to do is push up my pawn to attack that knight. So he sees this. I want to push this up and attack that knight. He sees this, so he develops his knight to stop that. He's also attacking this square right here, and I don't like that, so I respond attacking that square as well as being able to push forward so I can capture this knight, adding a defender whenever my pawn goes there. So that's just what's going on, if you guys couldn't tell. He then decides to bring up his pawn here. Now, if I were to capture this, he would bring his queen down and capture this, and I'd have to bring my knight back, and he would successfully gain control of the center. And I didn't want that to happen. So I decided to just, before I do anything here, I wanted to bring my knight up. And I could have pushed my pawn up. If I did, then I would probably be able to get the knight to move, but at this point there's really no need. So I decided to just go ahead he decides to go ahead and take. And then I decided to take. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember what happened. He decides to take, and as you can see, some fireworks are really going off here, and I take. Now here's the thing that I thought was kind of strange, but in actuality it was probably his better move. You would expect him to capture with his pawn here, but he decided to attack with his queen. Now, that may have seemed like a bad move to some people, but let me show you why that's actually a pretty good move. I know it's a little different here because it's I have two different things set up here, but if he were to capture with his pawn, let's say, right, I would have had to move my knight, and I would have attacked that pawn. That would be my next move. So he would probably want to add a defender. Okay. And I would also develop my bishop. The threat is the fork, where I can attack the king and the knight because my bishop would be protecting. So he would probably castle to avoid this. And as you can see, I have my pieces a little bit further ahead. I would probably also castle. And the game would probably continue on semi like this. He may push his pawn up, and the game would be about equal. But he didn't want equal. He wanted to, be really aggressive. So that's why I did that. Probably, I don't know. So I attack with my queen, and he takes back with his pawn. Now this is where I move up. Now here he has to pay attention here because my knight is threatening this square, which is forking the king and I keep calling it the knight. It's the rook. So he wants to stop this. So he's going to put me in check first. That way he has room to castle to avoid that fork. I want to get rid of his light square bishop. Now you're probably thinking, oh man, now you can't castle, but it's not a big deal if you can't castle. Once the queens go off the board, it's pretty much the green light that you're getting to the end game pretty soon. So it's okay to bring your king up the board, especially since no piece is really going to be able to threaten your king. I wouldn't put him in the center of the board till most of the pieces go off the board. So if your king is ever like towards the center, like where mine is now, his is castled, the best thing you want to do is exchange pieces, because then your king is actually a pretty good piece once most of the pieces, the minor and major pieces, are off the boards. So first to take back the pawn. He brings his bishop here, mainly just to develop it, to connect his rooks in the back row, which is pretty good. So I decide to develop my rook as well. Now he decides to attack. Now this is good news. Remember, you want to exchange pieces as much as possible now that your king is heading towards the center of the board. That way it makes it more safe for your king to move around. Alright, so instead of attacking with my rook, I want to kind of move my knight in a better position. You always want to look for the in-between move. I could, of course, capture with my rook, and he could capture back, and then, but I would actually kind of have not so great of a position. So you always want to think ahead, like if you're going to lose pieces no matter what, try and make it the best, get inside the best position. So first I just bring my bishop. Now he has to attack my bishop there. If he doesn't, then, I'm going to be obviously a lot better. So he takes, I take, he takes, I take back. Now there's a few things he can do here. I don't think, his next move was to move his rook to attack my rook. Not such a good move because as you can see, that pawn is completely undefended. So after my rook takes his rook and his knight goes here, as you can see, all his pieces are way back, like where they started, and my pieces are semi pushing up the board. So you always kind of want to pay attention. And now I'm going to capture his pawn, and I'm going to try and create a pass pawn, or in other words, a pawn that can just go out the board without anything in its way. Now he has to develop his knight. I also move my king up just because I don't want him to move his knight and get me in check. I always want to kind of get outside of any kind of possibilities of getting a check. Something good to know, if a knight is on a white square, it can only get your king in check if your king is also on a white square. So if your king is on a black square and their knight is on a white square, it can't get you in check. That's always a good way of remembering. He pushes up his pawn just to kind of push his way up the board and eventually, break apart my pawn island on the left. I move my king, and the whole reason I'm moving my king here is because I want to attack this pawn as well as immobilize this king. I don't want this king going anywhere. If I can get my king right up here, he won't be able to do anything about it. He develops his knight. He pushes up his knight to attack one of my pawns, but that's okay. Because if that knight attacks one of those, it's going to be further and further away. Right now, my main focus is on the right here. Don't worry about losing your pieces. So I just continue to move up the board with my king instead of my pawns. You don't want to do pawns first. You want to immobilize as many pieces. If I can get my king up the board, I'm essentially taking his king out of the game so he can't use it. He attacks. I continue to push up, and as you can see, he is on a white square. He could push up his knight right here, but he doesn't. I don't know why I brought his king there. There's really no point, because I'm just going to move my king here. Now the king cannot move anywhere. He's going to move his knight. Eventually, he wants to bring his knight here to put me in check, but that's not going to matter. I really shouldn't have done this, what I just did here. But I just kind of didn't want him to have the option to put me in check whenever he wants, because eventually my pawns on the right are going to be pushing up, and I don't want him to fork any of my pawns. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically I wanted to make sure this knight moves. And not only that, he was probably going to attack my pawn here, so I kind of wanted to delay these pawns as much as possible. If you don't understand what I'm trying to say, then, if you have a chessboard, if you have anything like that, you can kind of see if I were to not push this pawn up, he would attack it with his knight, and he would eventually push these pawns up, no problem. It would take me longer to get these pawns on the other side of the board. So then he has to move his knight, so he puts me in check. I move up, and like I said, he cannot move his king. He decides to move his knight here to try and go to the right side of the board, but I'm going to push my pawns up so he can't do anything funny. He does the same thing. I continue to push up. Now his idea here is to bring his knight right here and fork both these pawns. I don't like that, so I'm going to go ahead and push this pawn up and protect that square. He decides to push up all his pawns. Probably didn't have to do that. I think that was kind of a wasted move on his part. I could have just moved his other pawn up, but I decide to move my knight. And you always want to look at the position of the board. When is it okay to exchange pieces? You don't want to exchange pieces whenever you're kind of in a bad spot. Like if he were to take my knight right now, I would take his knight. I would take this pawn. My king would eventually take this pawn, and then these pieces will go up the board, and I would get 2 queens. And it would take him a few more moves for him to get his white pieces to get over here. So I really want to exchange right now. But he doesn't want that. I decide to move my king up. The reason why is I want to put my king right. I want to put my knight right here to attack his knight. So I need to protect that square. He decides to move up his pawn. I decide to do this. And not only this, he kind of has to take now. Otherwise, I am going to just take this pawn, and then I'm going to have 2 passed pawns. So he has to take, and then I take back with my king. His king tries to get closer, but it's not going to matter. My king is really preventing him. I decide to take his. He takes my pawn. Now it's getting kind of close. As you can see, his pawn right there is getting close to the edge. So I decide to go ahead and take. He's pushing up, and as you can see, he's going to get his queen first, but the one advantage I have is that I can put him in check and I gain momentum. So he has to move his king. Now there's a few things I could do here. I could move my queen. That was the best spot for his king. Otherwise I would have kept pushing, keep getting him in check. I could move my queen here, and well, that's what I did. That's the better move, I think. If I were to move, let's say, my queen here and eventually push up to here, he would put me in check, and then he would take this. Really, you also have to, he is, keep in mind, attacking this pawn, so I have to protect this. Otherwise, he's going to have another passed pawn. I'll have a passed pawn as well, but if our queens ever get exchanged, which he'll probably go for, his king is closer to attack this than this one is closer to getting another queen. So that's my mindset. I couldn't really predict 15 moves ahead, so I'm not that good, but I had a vague idea that it wouldn't be really in my favor. So I decided to protect that pawn. He decides to put me in check. No, it's not a big deal. Now, I'm not sure why he kept putting me in check, because now my king is going to be really close to his king, and that's good whenever you have a queen, because then it's easier to put him in checkmate. He's trying to move his queen closer, as you can see. But there's really nothing he can do. He took about 15 minutes trying to think about what he could do, but he eventually just tried to exchange, which was a terrible idea. I'll go back and show you what would have happened, but this is how the game continued. I push up my pawn, and you always want to keep your king, preventing him from getting closer. And as you can see, my pawn's going to make it, and he resigned right there. So, a few things before I go back and look at different variations. The key thing is controlling the center. Knowing when exactly to exchange pieces. Whenever your king gets towards the center of the board, you want to go ahead and exchange pieces as much as you can. That way your king will have an easier time. The only reason why you castle is because we need safety, but if there's nothing on the board to threaten the king, then the king's actually a good piece. And also, it's like I said, the key thing here I'd say is knowing when to exchange pieces. That's what I'll probably entitle the video, but let's go back. When his queen was right here, there's really nothing he could have done. If he were to move his queen right here, then I would just move up, and then he would eventually just kind of get into a semi-stalemate. Like he may do something like this, but I'm just going to continue to, move around. It's kind of hopeless for him. I actually would have taken the draw in this position for him because that would have been better. But there's really no hope for him to win. As soon as his queen stops putting me in check, it's over. So, like I said, there's really nothing he can do. He should have just taken the draw. I didn't want to offer a draw because I was hoping he'd get impatient, so that was kind of good too. So anyway, that was the video, and I hope you guys learned something. And yeah, have a good day.